On Thursday, I met with a group of clergy people from a variety of faiths around Riverdale. And one of the rabbis reminded us that while for some, part of our unity comes from believing we're all children of some God, one of the things we know for certain and can share is, as Carl Sagan said, we are all made of stardust. So earlier this week was Valentine's Day. And at this time of year, sometimes the sugary sentiments are enough to send us into a diabetic coma. We've been bombarded with images of romantic love and falling in love. If you're not in a relationship, especially, it can be a bit much or a lot too much. And then Friday was Random Acts of Kindness Day. So we also may have seen lots of small ways that we can make a better world. We thought it would be good this month of February to step back a bit and think about what love really means in a variety of ways. Our theme for the month is the path of love, one of the ways we can approach more ethical living, and the one that, for me personally, is probably the most important. Jay Hooper talked already this month about love of ideas and wisdom. Last week, the grown-ups and kids explored different ways that people love or express their gender, and reached out with love to those who may not be free to learn more. Next week, Christian will talk about the dynamics of one-on-one relationships. Today, my theme is about a more universal love than the one-on-one theme of Valentine's Day. To quote Dr. Cornel West, justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love looks like in private. Can we really love everyone? All of humanity, groups of people, people we've never met and likely never will meet, people who are often very different from us? Is it possible to love all of humanity? And especially when there are so many in the world who sometimes seem unlovable, who do terrible things to their fellow human beings, who act in destructive ways. Can love move our world towards goodness? And what about beyond humanity? Certainly it's possible to draw even broader circles for our love, for our caring and our tenderness and compassion. Well, science has shown in a number of ways that as human beings, we tend to have priorities about who we care for most. Experimentally, we can measure that people tend to prioritize in their caring those most closely related to us first. Our nuclear family in many cases. Then those related to us, but not quite so close. Then those people we're familiar with. And then those people we mentally identify as us. We seem as human beings to have a built-in capacity in our minds, and maybe even a drive to separate the world into us and them, in terms of who we would save first if we had to make a choice. And we also have a mental capacity to expand our ideas and clan or tribe. We aren't stuck with the divisions that we first encounter in our lives. But how wide we can expand our circle of caring in practice can vary. The bad news is that this kind of prioritization ends up often with abstract categories of who we care more about. When the British first settled in America, their laws often preferred the group they called the English over those they called Black or Indian. Eventually, they invented the term white so that the laws could have a preference for us, those making the laws, that also included the French, and the Dutch and a few other European groups who were also beginning to settle and push out the natives and enslave those from Africa. I would say that that division is still present today. Many people we may have been hearing about are motivated by what's called white replacement theory. The idea that white people in this country are under attack because they might soon be a numerical minority in this nation. And so there's a fear of people who are outside that made-up category of white, or those who support its continued superior power and authority. There's fear or even hate for the others. And that's the bad news, that we can draw bigger circles and then stop at some level, excluding part of humanity. But the good news is that those stopping points are arbitrary. Our mental capacity allows us to expand the circle of who we care about, not only to those people we call white people or people of color, but to broaden it to encompass all of humanity. We can expand our sense of who us really means. We can also expand beyond that to other sentient beings and to all life. I think here of that loving kindness meditation. We've done variations of it many times here. May I be healthy and happy. May you be healthy and happy. May all people be healthy and happy. May all living beings be healthy and happy. We all have priorities in who and what we care about. Even the strictest vegan survives by eating that which is alive. We tend to care in a different way about our children, our pets, than we do maybe about predators who might attack our pets or our children. And we often care a lot less about forms of life like bacteria. 30 years ago, I was at the Parliament of the World's Religions. There, I met many nuns who came from the Sikh religion, which practices reverence for all life. These nuns wore face masks all the time so that they would minimize the microorganisms they breathed in and thus would be responsible for killing. That was really taking seriously the idea of caring for all living beings and doing the least harm possible. To go back to that quote by Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, we're all connected to each other biologically, and to the earth chemically, and to the rest of the universe atomically. We are part of the universe, we are in it and of it. And sometimes we hold on tight, and sometimes we broaden our perspective. In my social justice work, and I imagine for some of you, you've had a similar experience, I've known plenty of people who worked for justice on a large scale, but who were not all that kind or loving in their closest relationships, like family. Maybe they treated people who worked for their organization as not much different than filing cabinets. Maybe, and all too often it's happened, they were sexual predators or otherwise treated individual people pretty badly. We've probably all met the stereotype of people who care for humanity in general, but not much for individual people. Or for the earth. They care for the earth, but not much for the people on it. Well, I believe we can't neglect smaller circles and just love the larger circles, not and really be operating out of love. Thus, our program next week is about closer relationships, which also matter. But I'm focusing this week right in on the love of all humanity at that level, though it's always within that larger context of interconnection with all that is and all that was and will be. So a bit of definition. There are many ways our culture uses the term love. I learned about family counseling from Dr. Roberta Gilbert, who wrote a book, Extraordinary Relationships. She makes the provocative suggestion that we not talk about love, because there are so many different ideas about what love means that our expectations may be different. But I can't agree with giving up the word. I think it's more important to talk through what those different meanings are, because I just don't think there's any other word that quite works as well. Nevertheless, I still recommend Gilbert's book to help us build better relationships. So when I say love, I don't just mean a sense or a feeling. Dr. West's quote earlier about love in public being justice and personal love being tenderness is describing two ways of acting in the world. And I think the case was made well since the 1970s in the feminist movement that personal and political are not really separable. Love, personal or political, is both a sense or feeling and a way of action. The idea that we mean different things by love, though, isn't new. The classic Greeks categorized love into four categories. There was eros, or romantic love, with feelings of desire and passion. There was philia, the love between friends, where we have mutual respect and shared interests. The third kind is storge, or familial love, like that love many immediately feel when we hold our child or grandchild for the first time. These kinds of love often overlap. Initial infatuation and attraction grows into mutual respect and then into a deep sense of family. These were used, all of these, in ancient Greece to talk about different ways we practice love with family and kin. And then there was the fourth kind of love the Greeks called agape, a selfless, unconditional love, the desire and then action to do good for others who aren't related to us, aren't family or friends. Now, I might add a few kinds of love. There's the expanding of agape and sense of family to a love of all of humanity, not just those narrowly defined as us. There's global and universal love with care and concern for all people and the world as a whole, a connection to the universe. And at the other end, there's self-love, showing the same care and responsibility towards self that one would show to others. Some prioritize self-love over love of others, but it's also true that we are often in our culture taught to love others and not ourselves, either neglecting self-love or practicing it at the expense of others can lead to toxic forms that masquerade as love. We can love another who doesn't love back in a healthy way. We can attribute worth to others even if they don't return that attribution. Lack of respect for the worth of another, I believe, is never really love. Infatuation doesn't become love until you want the best for the other. There's also the kind of infatuation which attracts you to somebody in order to use that other person, to control them, to abuse or manipulate them. And then there's the kind of infatuation sometimes called codependency, when we don't love ourselves well enough to have healthy boundaries. The philosopher Immanuel Kant talked about a supreme ethical rule being to treat each other as ends, that is, as actually existing people who deserve to exist and thrive, not as mere means to our own end. The golden rule, some form of which is common to almost every human culture, asks that we respect others by seeing the actions we do, supposedly out of love, from their perspective and not just our own. Love, whether it's public or private, close family, or the world, includes respect for the uniqueness of others, their differences from us, their separateness as individuals, which is just how we would want to be treated, as who we are. It doesn't mean we tolerate every single action that others do, especially when those actions are not coming from a mutual respect or love. But it is about respect for the actual needs and experiences of others. And so love of humanity is really complicated. How can we possibly take into account all the myriad individualities and differences in it? And of course we can't, not completely. Being aware we cannot and do not completely know, I think that's essential because it keeps us curious. We have to make some generalizations to get through life. But when we imagine that everyone in a group is actually exactly the same, that's where toxicity comes in, and we don't respect the individuals within the group. Compassion and empathy are similar words to love, but I want to differentiate them a bit. Both have the root word of passion, and love, not just romantic love, often has an aspect of passion. But I don't think compassion and empathy are the same as each other or quite the same as love. Authentic love includes empathy and compassion, but it's more than that. Empathy is understanding the feelings and needs of others, resonating with them even if you don't share the same feelings and needs. Empathy is connected to the idea of the golden rule and to perspective taking. But empathy isn't always love, because sociopaths use empathy very efficiently to know how to manipulate people. Yet trying to love humanity without having empathetic understanding of others can lead us to paternalistic actions that often don't meet real needs. Love needs empathy, but empathy isn't love. Compassion involves caring for others, acting to meet their needs, and is a part of love, the part that wants to end the suffering of others, wants well-being for everyone. I think of compassion as a large part of healthy love, but I think love is bigger. Love without compassion, that doesn't care about the well-being of the other, is, I think, one of those toxic forms that masquerades as love. A healthy love has compassion. Compassion, though, may not involve the understanding of empathy or the connection of love. I think of love as bigger. I also try to remember for myself that within our love of humanity, there are different audiences, you might say, for our love that may affect how we are able to express that love. It's perhaps easiest to love most those who we see them as equals and they see us as peers too, and who are pretty much thriving at the same level, even if they're in a different culture. The core of love and justice, I believe, is to value everyone as equal at the level of human worth. So our loving relationship to those who seem already to be our peers is a crucial part of love of all humanity. And I think we often forget that group when we think about who we are loving in humanity. The second may be the most obvious one, love of those who are suffering. How can we not think of this when we hear about thousands who have died in Turkey and Syria in the recent earthquake, or those killed when their apartment buildings are targeted by a missile in Ukraine? Part of love is allowing ourselves to have empathy for the people who are suffering, as well as for their joy if they survive. Love includes action, looking within, figuring out what is in our capacity to do in response, and to do that in ways that are more likely to be out of respect for the people who are suffering, letting their dignity flower. We want the best for those we truly love. And that applies even to those who are distant and we don't know. To respond to suffering only in the ways that make us feel comfortable and don't threaten in any ways our own being, that's not necessarily a healthy love. So here is one of the biggest challenges for our love of humanity. We cannot save all. Sometimes trying to save one person means we sacrifice many others. Utilitarian ethics say that the path of most authentic respect is to save as many as possible. As with some carrying closer to home, we have to practice often a kind of triage, directing our actions to do the most good. So I'm going to bring Felix Adler in here. Although we don't in any sense worship the founding thinker of ethical culture, I do think he had many ideas that are amazingly relevant today. And one was in this area. He saw how much of a challenge it was to an expansive ethics, one that accompanies humanity or even beyond, that it can break our hearts when we realize we cannot save everyone. Seeing all the injustice, all the suffering in the world, Adler said, is like standing on the shore, watching millions drown, and knowing that we are not capable of saving them all. So what then is the loving answer? Adler suggested it was this, and I agree with him. Loving humanity means we do what we are capable of doing to end as much suffering as we are capable of and to prevent as much future suffering as we can. And it's also knowing and grieving that we cannot save all. Because I think that the knowledge and grief of knowing we can't save all can be a motivation to do good. For some, it can also be a justification for not doing anything. Any action which builds a healthier society in which people can thrive, that is an act of love of humanity, even though we can't do everything that everyone needs. So there's a third audience beyond those who are basically peers and similar in where they are in life to us and those who are suffering. And that is those who are still developing their full selves. I think here especially of children. In the family, we love our children, even if they are not yet fully who they will someday be. And in loving humanity, it means loving all who are still learning and developing. But then there's the toughest of loving humanity. Do we love those who actively oppress and abuse? How do we, for instance, love the soldiers of an invading army that is killing civilians? How do we love terrorists who are murdering? Well, this question always reminds me of a friend I had who lived in Iraq for many years. And she and her husband and child left on the first plane they could after Saddam Hussein came to power because they knew his capacity for doing harm. At the end of the 1990-91 US war against Iraq, which is about the time that she was my friend, thousands of ground soldiers in Iraq were killed. They were trying to invade Kuwait and they were killed by US troops. When that happened, my friend, who had lived in Iraq for many years, reminded us that from her experience, Saddam had had for a long time a practice of drafting into the army men who were from families that had dared to oppose him. And their cooperation in being in the army was essential to their families not enduring more consequences. So most of us here did not realize that when our troops wiped out that army of ground troops in Iraq, what we were wiping out was mostly Saddam's opposition. I think love means being able to take in the complexity sometimes of those who are doing evil things. So how do we love people who we think of as oppressors or invaders or abusers, those who are causing harm? Of course, there are times in life when love sets boundaries and doesn't tolerate harmful actions. Those boundaries are part of love, and without them, we cannot have a world that is more loving. How many of us have lived a life in which we never acted in a way that caused harm to others? That is also worth thinking about when we think about those who are causing harm. What would we have wanted in those times to get better? Our love can recognize that those who are hurting and oppressing others are usually doing so out of their own fears. If you control others with violence, you are usually acting out of fear of those others. And the reality is you are creating your own fear because those people you're controlling may topple you with violence. James Baldwin wrote, "I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain." As Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King and Nelson Mandela knew, one can resist or stop those who oppress without hating them. In fact, understanding the roots of oppression and hate in pain and wanting to end pain for everyone can mean we find more realistic and lasting solutions. That is the answer of love. Cultures of violence and hate produce more violence and hate and therefore more fear. Cultures of peace and love produce more harmony, more peace and love when they also love peace and justice enough to set and enforce boundaries. So yes, love of humanity, I believe, is possible, even if it's not easy and even if we all slip up some of the time. Love is an action, not just a sense or feeling. The more we embody love and practice it in the world, the more others experience love and are able to grow and change. So how do we practice the love of humanity? If love is action, not just feeling, then we need to act. We can start, I believe, by practicing acts of love for those closest, ourselves, our families, and our neighbors. Small acts of love, kindness, and understanding help us build patterns of behavior that are very valuable when the bigger challenges are available to us. We can practice perspective taking and empathy, including understanding instead of dismissing the cultural practices of others, which we don't ourselves share. That means building relationships with people from different backgrounds and cultures, and actively listening to understand different ideas and experiences. It means increasing our knowledge of what the causes are of suffering and inequality and hate, avoiding quick fixes and easy answers, and working to promote justice and equality for all. It means being open to that grief and pain that accompanies any love when there is a loss. In this case, the grief and pain that comes, for instance, with a violation of human worth, or when we have to do a kind of triage and save only some. This is not a perfect world, and it will never be free of loss. Sometimes we give money, sometimes we give time. When we do that, I always recommend we pick organizations that practice respect for who they serve, rather than paternalism and deciding for others what they want. It's helpful to look to support long-term solutions where we can. In crisis, immediate help is also a part of love, but love also looks for thriving and not just surviving. Acts of love cultivate the sense of loving, and the feeling and sense of love motivate acts of love. It's an interconnected system. Being connected to wider and wider circles in love expands our own self and our sense of ourself. We truly are more of our best when we more actively seek the best in others. Tenzin Gyatso, the current Dalai Lama, said it this way: love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. Or Leo Tolstoy, love is the only way to rescue humanity from all its ills. So what do you bring, either as a dream or a skill or an ability or a commitment, to bringing more love of humanity into reality in this world? So we're going to have some time for those of you who are watching this live, whether in person here in the room or on Zoom, to reflect a bit on that. First, though, I want to say goodbye to those who are watching this later on video. Come join us some Sunday live for more complete experience of caring community, and find out more about us at rysec.org.